Kasey and I, a few years ago, spent, I don't know, 40, 60 hours, I don't know. The number of hours we spent probably grows every year, is my memory, if it gets dimmer. But we discussed this at great length, this violation classification document, and I think we did a good job. Our goal was to provide a clear example and describe a process for you, not one size does not fit all by any means, and it's really up to the inspector. But I'm already, oops, I'm putting the wrong button.
Red. Yeah.
Okay. Now we've got our disclaimer here, and with that I'm going to go on to the guidance document. And all I want you to focus on now is a highlighted section. Selecting the appropriate response is often a difficult decision. And the idea of this document is to provide guidelines and examples so that we can strive towards consistency across the unified program. I know in San Diego we're a pretty big CUPA, and it's a constant challenge to try to be, just among ourselves, to try to be consistent. You know, how did we do this last time? How did we handle this? How are we being consistent with other businesses? That's the idea behind this, is to try to drive. All of us, it doesn't matter if you're in Alpine County or in LA County, we're reaching essentially the same conclusion. And so the purpose of it was for more consistent enforcement response. Give you some examples of things to consider, and it's a starting place. It's all it is. There are some things that are by definition, and we'll go into that, it's a certain category of violation, primarily Class 1, but the vast majority require inspectors' judgments. There's no new regulations here. It's a guidance document that extracts from all of the regulations. And you're not mandated to use it, but the idea, though, if we're going to get for consistency, we've got to be talking. Talk to your peers from different counties at the conference. Look at that network. How do we do this? And work together for consistency. Now, how does this come in? You know, when you go out and inspect, you make observations, or do they support the violation, or do you observe the elements of the violations as support of violation, and then based on that is when after that is when the violation classification is done. We sometimes in San Diego say, you got to go back to the office. You might check the file. You might get more information. You might talk to the previous inspector. There's a lot of ways to get information. You don't necessarily have to make this determination in the field. You can certainly consult with your peers and supervisors. If you're one-person CUPA, the CUPA next door. But that's where it goes into. And then when we're talking about the big scheme of all our guidance document, the inspection report writing comes into the notice to comply, the notice of violations, you know. And then, and only then, if we come into the AEO guidance comes in about what is the appropriate enforcement response, which of course is what Lisa just talked about. Keep putting this behind my back here. So the way the document's laid out is with a introduction, and it goes through a lot of regulatory citations to talk about the existing nomenclature in law and regulation. And then new nomenclature in that we applied what is primarily in the hazardous waste laws to all of the unified program. And then we gave examples of things to consider when you're classifying, things not to consider, and then examples. How to apply these principles. And that's just what that test was. If you looked at it and spent a little time thinking about it, we were asking you that. And each one of you, depending on the circumstances, you might have classified it one way and you might have classified it different, because in your mind, you're seeing a different scene. You know, your background is different, you know, what you're seeing there. And that's legitimate and to be expected. Now, a minor violation is in the law that establishes a unified program, so it applies, that definition is consistent across all the programs. We see the definition of Class 1 in hazardous waste and definition of Class 2. In this guidance document, we just decided, we made the decision, conscious decision, let's use this same nomenclature for all the unified programs. This is the statutory violation of a minor violation. And you notice it's what it's not what it is. It tells you what it can't be. If somebody's injured, it can't be a minor violation. If it poses a significant threat, it cannot be. If it's knowing, willful, or intentional, it cannot be. Chronic or recalcitrant results in emergency response. And things that prevent you from doing your inspection. None of those can be a minor violation by definition in law. Now, I've already really covered this, but what we're talking about is we adopted for Class 1 and Class 2 the hazardous waste definitions. And then depending on the data system you use, some unified program agencies classify immediately in the field, others wait and classify it later. But as we came up with, and actually Mickey Pierce came up with this, he said, Class 1 means it's bad. You know, I mean, it's the most egregious type of violation. Willful, intentional, negligent, knowing or should have known, poses a significant threat. Chronic or recalcitrant, inspection after inspection, you see it. And these Class 1 violations warrant an enforcement action. Again, sometimes you might get back and learn other facts and decide it's no longer Class 1, but typically your Class 1 violation should be matched up with an enforcement action of some type. What's a Class 2? Well, it's the violations that aren't Class 1 and aren't a minor violation. An easy one is minor violations need to be corrected within 30 days, and they need to let the Unified Program Agency know that they're corrected. And I think when you read the law that way, you can assume if that is not done, that violation automatically becomes a Class 2 violation because they're no longer provided a safe harbor for enforcement if they don't meet that 35-day window. Significant threat. If something's in the middle of the desert, it might not have the same level of risk or threat that if it's in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. Chronic, when we're talking about this, I talked to 3 different prosecutors, and they said it could be as little as twice. You know, repeating 2 different questions. Yes?
So you said if a minor is not corrected in 30 days, it would go to a Class 2, not a Class 1?
Typically, I would say Class 2, and this is typically the way we do it in San Diego. Okay, they don't correct it, it goes Class 2. The next time they don't do it, you know, it said, okay, it's a Class 1. You know, we need to do something about that. We're still striving for consistency there. Some of our inspectors I'll give a business another chance and say, you know, this has been a decade. You know, we're all getting old. We probably should change this retirement, you know.
Is there any other explanation of Class 2? A little bit better, like if it is not Class 1 or minor, it is Class 2. Can you explain Class 2 a little bit further?
Yeah, I mean, and when we get to examples, I think it'll be clear. But I think in most cases, not almost all, in most cases, a violation, you know, the same exact violation of the law could go up one category or not depending on the circumstances. You know, the risk it poses, the chronic nature, you know, those sort of a bunch of factors play in. And it's your decision. But we'll go, I think the examples will make that a lot clearer. At least that's the goal of the guidance document. Economic benefit in the context of the definition, you know, and we struggled on this one. You know, clearly $50 might be important to one very small business, but does Shell Oil care about $50? Is Don Johnson, this, you know, I was thinking about this today. I tend to tell our inspectors, because of our hourly costs, you know, I said, Every 2 minutes of your time is a dollar, you know. Think of it in that terms, and so I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste all of your time. Everybody in this room, you see, this is a pretty expensive class. So ideally, we're going to get the information to you. And so everybody in here, you're sitting down, somebody's paying your salary, I think, in most cases, if not all of them, and that costs money. And so what is that? How does that relate in the context of the violation classification? It's very much related to the business type. You could almost argue that anything that non-compliance gives you some kind of economic benefit, but at what level do you consider it? And for person, in this guidance document, each one of the different laws has a different definition, slightly different definition of person. We just kind of rolled them all together to simplify it. So, how to classify a violation? Is it a class 1? Yes or no? And we'll talk about the standards. Is it a minor? Yes or no? And if it's no on the first question and no on the second question, then it must be a class 2. You know. So, and that's pretty much the way you go through the process. Extent of deviation. Did they fail to check the physical state on the hazardous waste label, or did they not label it at all? It's still a labeling violation, but there's a significant difference in the extent of the deviation. Missing an element or complete disregard. Does the violation render the rule useless? I mean, remember, the people of California passed these laws. You know, went through both houses of the legislature. The governor signed it. You know, and then it's our job to implement and enforce it. You know, if they're not paying attention, then we've got to do something. But you know, another example: incomplete emergency plan versus not having prepared one. You know, a big difference there. Not having updated one. Total number of violations. Look for a pattern of neglect or disregard for the regulatory requirements. You know, if they label 999 drums out of 1,000 correctly each time, they've got some regard for the regulatory requirements. It looks to me like they just made a mistake or missed one somehow. But clearly, they know if they do it correctly on 999 out of 1,000, they understand what they're doing and they're being diligent. The volume or hazardous of the waste or materials, the proximity of the population at risk, and how do these increase it? Is it, you know, they can affect each other, obviously. Intent, and I always tell our inspectors, you know, you gotta have, to prove intent, you gotta have some kind of evidence of it. Don't tell me that you suspect and or your intuition, you think this person intended or didn't care or didn't do that. I need evidence to support it. And most of the time, they don't come back with evidence. The one person that's giving in a criminal case presentation this afternoon, Hosty, she sees it as a challenge when I say that to her. She says, okay, I'm going to go out and find it, show Viz. And she does it. You know, a remarkable person. So intent, you know, you got to have evidence to support it. But if you've got it, if you know they intended it, then it's probably time to talk to your district attorney. You know, that's. And I should be cautious there. To go back to Lisa, I don't know how many times I said, Mike, Karen, that's our deputy district attorney that does she know about? Yes, Lisa. I ran it by Karen first, you know, but so you need to work with your prosecutors very closely. Regulatory history, and this, think about SIRS, think about this now. Pretty soon, in a couple of years, they're going to be able to, the newspaper, the magazine, the national NRDC, the CUPA evaluators, they're going to be able to go online and say, huh, this inspector in this CUPA never finds a violation, whereas this one's doing all this good work. What's going on here? I mean, that's going to happen. You can expect it. I've seen it happen because we've had a database in San Diego, well, we're getting media inquiries, and they look at that. And they're remarkably good, too. Why haven't you taken enforcement action against these facilities? I said, well, we're in the, you know, unfortunately, I had good answers for all of those. But you can expect that to happen. So that's another reason to strive for consistency, because pretty soon if you're inconsistent, it's going to be very obvious to anybody who's interested in looking. This question came up, and really that's at the penalty phase when we talk about what constitutes inability to pay. Don't consider it before then, or nor do you consider the size of the business. You know, now you don't want to, when you're classifying a violation, you say, well, I don't want to put this class 1. I know my DA is too busy and won't be able to help me with that, or and this is reality, at least with our inspectors, you know, saying, well, my supervisor wants me to do X number of inspections. If I put together an enforcement case, I'm going to be 30 inspections behind because it's a lot of work to do it right, you know, and that's a real thing. You don't consider that. You've got to go on the violations and go forward and do your job correctly. Now, we realize that they're factors, and you know, the CUPA evaluators don't, but they do look at the number of enforcements. I think I could try to argue that one, but they want to see those inspection numbers too. But the steps. Do you have a violation? Do you have the evidence to support it? And you've got to make sure that you document that carefully. And then you determine what the appropriate violation is. And then usually in conjunction with other people in our department, yeah, I don't make the decision. I sign off on it, goes to our director, and he signs off on that. But pretty much, you know, we've got a very consistent program, and it's very mature now. We pretty much know where everything's going to go, and we've already usually talked to the DA in advance with our task force. I'm going to digress. Y'all should get mad at us. We were very lucky in San Diego. You know, I mean, there was one of our city attorneys was sitting in that audience. The deputy district attorney and county counsel were all in the audience this morning. They're here attending the conference. They really care about supporting us. We're very lucky that way. So, you know, I don't really have to worry about that. I just want to make sure it's consistent. Okay, now we're going to give some examples. This is where the test comes in. Oops, can I go? Did I jump? No. Minor violation. Failure to submit an annual certification when there's no change. Does everybody kind of agree that's minor? I mean, that one I think we can, not a lot of controversy. Failure to specify the locations of a low hazard chemical on the site map. Low hazard chemical on the site map. The site map's part of the inventory if your agency requires it, that tells you where that chemical is. But not consistent. Kasey and I might have talked 2 hours about this. You know. Class 2. This is the big one, number 1. This is the Cal EPA person on this. Said, how can you do this? Failure to submit or implement a business plan. So that's the complete disregard for an entire body of law. And we said, well, the reality is all of us do that. We go out to them and cite a violation and usually help them make their business plan for low hazard materials, low volume, low hazard. Clearly, if it's a great big chemical manufacturer, that we wouldn't do that. But that one was hard to sell.
It was a hard sell.
Yep. Failure to include a hazardous material in an inventory submission. Failure to provide or update emergency contacts.
So what you're saying is if a mom and pop fails to submit a business plan, it's a class 2. If Chevron fails to submit a business plan, it's a class 1.
It could, yeah, it could very well be.
We need to repeat the question because we're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, is if a mom and this is where the debate was. You're centering on the debate. If a mom and pop failed to submit a business plan, is that a Class 2? But if Chevron does, is that a Class 1? Well, let's not look at the size or pockets, deep pockets of the owner. Let's look at the risk to the environment. And that's what we're saying. For the ones that are small mom and pops, typically their hazardous materials inventory is small relative to a Chevron refinery or something. That was the logic behind this, not so much their ability and knowledge in those sort of things, although those were factors that you would consider.
Chevron have an environmental compliance group where the mom and pop is just the father's doing it on a waste of time.
And then the follow-on was Chevron have an environmental compliance group and the mom and pop don't have that kind of consideration? Is that a factor? Maybe. I'm going to throw that back and say, well, it depends on the inspector. If the environmental compliance group has done a very good job and for some reason they missed some little facility, then maybe, you know, I would consider their pattern. But good question. That's, like I said, we talked more than 2 hours on that one.
Well, you know, just to chime in, that's the person with just got their driver's license, and they get pulled over and get a ticket, they get a warning. But the other person who's been driving for, you know, 25 years, who's a certified driver trainer, ought to know better.
The question was, and this is consistent, this is the kind of critical thinking we need for violation classification. A brand new driver, don't they get the same ticket for running a stop sign as somebody who's been teaching driver's ed for the last 20 years?
Professionals get double fine, like 10 times more fine than regular drivers. It is like that. If you have professional driving license, your ticket is like 6 times more than regular driver.
If you're a truck driver and you get a ticket.
Yeah, that's right. And all the professionals.
Well,
We're going off.
Maybe you're more at risk with the mom and pop store who doesn't have that background. You're more at risk with the younger driver who doesn't have that experience.
Well, and I understand, and I like the way the thinking's going, but I want to get us back on course so we don't miss lunch.
I think, let me chime in, I just think that what happened is when we were talking about the realities of our job, you have inspectors out there that just aren't going to go to a mom and pop and say, Class 1 violation, you never filed a business plan, you should have known. That's just the reality.
And just one comment too, don't focus so much on the mom and pop, they're talking low volume, low
Low
hazard.
risk, low risk.
If the mom and pop has methyl ethyl bad stuff
True.
in large quantities,
That would be different.
that's not class.
Right. It's a different answer.
So yeah, it's really thank you, Lisa, that was a salient comment. And the last one, they didn't do annual refresher training, but the facility personnel are well trained. I once inspected a site with 2 brothers, and it was a chemical. They had a lot of stuff, but there was only 2 of them. One of them was a chemist, and one was more the marketing guy. They made soaps for a living. You know, they custom-made soaps, and they didn't have annual training, and they were mad at me when I cited that violation. You know, they said, we know what we're doing, we know all that, and they did. You know, they did a good job of with all other aspects. We said, no, you still need to document that you trained each other. You know.